In a small town in southern Ontario, a young teen and her mother would be attacked in their quiet home. This would lead to the realization that during the early 1990s, multiple teen girls would vanish or be found murdered throughout the region. Some whose killers were caught and prosecuted, but others who remain at large. Could these cases be connected? Or were there multiple serial killers lurking throughout Ontario at the time and preying among our youth?
Still no answers.
9 years ago today.
What happened to these two young children?
Remains a mystery.
Urgent story unfolding right now. Who is missing? An unsolved murder.
Thirteen-year-old Leah Sousa was born on June 7th of 1977 to her mother Laura, who was a single mother, and she had a 9-month-old baby brother named Michael. The family lived at Beachview Avenue in Cumberland Beach, a small community 135 kilometers north of Toronto along Lake Couchiching in Ontario, Canada. The town was a quiet mix of residential and cottage properties in the outskirts of Aurelia. Leah is remembered as a quiet, cheerful girl who was very involved in sports activities at school and had just graduated 8th grade at Artria Public School. She had a lot of friends and was the type of person who was always ready to stand up for you and help you when you needed something. Laura was described as a quiet and shy mother who kept to herself. September 1st of 1990 was the Labor Day weekend. The little family had just recently returned from vacation, and Leah was excited to start high school the following week. That evening, Leah decided to sleep on the couch, and her 36-year-old mother had slept in the bed in her own room. Her baby brother was asleep in his crib, which was in their mother's room. But sometime between 1:30 a.m. to 3 a.m., an intruder or intruders broke the glass on the back door of their home. They then beat Laura on her head as well as her body while she slept. Little Leah was then essayed before being dragged to the backyard where she was violently murdered. It's believed a metallic object was used to bludgeon Leah, possibly a tire iron or a pipe. Later that day, between 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., little Leah's body was discovered by a childhood friend outside in the backyard after the friend called the telephone at their home and got no answer. Authorities were called, and when they arrived, they'd find Leah's baby brother alone in his crib unharmed. Laura would be found semi-conscious on the living room floor, left to die but holding on. But due to being beaten so severely, she suffered severe head trauma and had no recollection of her or her daughter's attackers. Laura would then be hospitalized for 3 weeks following the attack, saying, quote, "There's a cold-blooded killer out there. Someone knows what happened to my daughter, and they haven't come forward. How would you feel if your only daughter was essayed, brutalized, and murdered? I'm lost here on earth. I often feel I don't belong here, and I should be in heaven with her." End quote. Despite the bloody scene, authorities were unable to recover any DNA from their attacker or attackers. They did, however, find a bloody footprint from a Nike all-leather court or tennis shoe, believed to be either a size 9 or size 10. Neighbors would also recall hearing screaming and shouts from the direction of the Sousa home in the early hours of September 1st, but they dismissed it at the time due to parties regularly happening in the area during the summertime. So authorities took to the area, immediately canvassing a 3-block radius around the murder scene. A neighbor named Tom Fogarty would tell the paper, quote, "There are lots of parents who are very uptight about the safety of their own children. Nobody is allowing their children out after dark because they just don't know what is happening." End quote. According to interviews Laura later gave with CTV, she had gone to great lengths over the years to try to recover her memory from that night. She underwent hypnosis, was injected with sodium pentothal, also known as a truth serum, and eventually traveled to Sudbury, Ontario to visit a lab run by Michael Persinger, an expert on the human brain. She underwent a process using magnetic fields which targeted the right hemisphere of her brain in an attempt to encourage any residual neurons that may be intact still. However, that process was unsuccessful. In 1994, after undergoing hypnosis, Laura claimed to recall being forced to abuse her daughter in some way by a tall attacker armed with a short pry bar, possibly wearing coveralls. Laura would say that the killer was a coward and didn't have the courage to have attacked her and her daughter during the day when they could have gouged their eyes out. It echoed a very similar speech given by Kaylee Gonzalez's sister during Brian Kohberger's hearing, where she said that if he hadn't have attacked the students in the middle of the night like a PDF file, Kaylee would have kicked his fucking ass. The same situation happened here. A allegedly grown man entering a home to attack a mother and a little girl, and to attack them when they're defenseless and sleeping. It's disgusting, and it is cowardly. Authorities would call Leah's murder one of the most brutal homicides in all of Ontario. They believe the family had been targeted due to Laura being a single mother with a baby and a teenage daughter. They also believe that whoever attacked the family had been familiar with the Cumberland Beach area, that they either lived in that area or they frequented that area. They also believe that the attacker or attackers knew that the family was alone that night, and that somebody with information about Leah's murder may still live in the Cumberland Beach community. In 1992, authorities were looking into a theory that Leah's killer may have been stalking other young female athletes across southern Ontario, stating several of the dozen unsolved abductions and murders of young girls in southern Ontario over the past decade at the time fit a pattern similar to the disappearances of two St. Catharines teens. All of the girls were athletes, actively involved in school sports and community events. And in at least 3 of the cases, authorities believe that the victims had been stalked by their killer who had actively been watching them while they were competing. So let's dive into some of those cases. On the evening of June 14th of 1991, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy went to a funeral home to attend a wake for her friend Chris Evans, a boy who had died in a car accident earlier that week. After the wake, a large group of teens met in the woods to drink and console one another. Shortly before 2 a.m., a group of friends decided to walk Leslie home, but when they arrived, they found the side door was locked. Ensuring her friends that the front door would definitely be unlocked, she sent her friends on their way home. But after they left, she found that it was in fact also locked. Now alone, Leslie decided to walk to a payphone at Mac's Milk and called a friend's house for permission to sleep over. Her friend would end up telling her that she couldn't sleep over, so after a lengthy conversation that ended somewhere around 2:30 a.m., she said that she would go back home and wake up her mother to get into the house. But when she failed to show up to Chris Evans' funeral later that day, her mother would call the police, Debbie filing paperwork on June 18th to seek and arrest her daughter as a runaway. But Leslie wasn't a runaway, because on June 29th, her dismembered remains would be found encased in concrete in Lake Gibson near St. Catharines. The concrete block contained her torso, which weighed over 200 pounds, her braces and dental records being what confirmed her identity. And authorities immediately believed that the teen had been essayed and tortured before her murder. Later that year, in November of 1991, 14-year-old Terri Anderson would vanish from St. Catharines, Ontario. Terri was active in sports at Lakeport Secondary School, with the goal of wanting to be popular when she entered high school. So she joined the cheerleading team, being one of only 2 ninth graders on the team. She was also on the principal's honor roll with an 88.3 grade average. In a report card, a teacher described Terri as a pleasure and used phrases such as good work and well done. With only 3 months of high school under her belt, she was making a name for herself academically and socially, but she still didn't feel like she was part of the most popular crowd, and so she felt pressured to do drugs to fit in. Her best friend, Julie Hibbert, saying, quote, 2 or 3 weeks before, she said she wanted to try drugs. I yelled at her, but she said some of the popular kids did it. All she kept saying is that she wanted to be popular. End quote. Terri was described as the kind of young teen that was never not on the phone talking with her friends. She was a happy, energetic kid that was always on the go. Only standing 5 feet tall and weighing around 80 pounds, she was a small girl who enjoyed reading, Nintendo games, and had a steady boyfriend. And as a kid, she was also interested in gymnastics and jazz dancing. Due to her smaller stature, it placed Terri on the top of the cheerleading squad's pyramid. Her coach, Margot Smith, saying that Terri fit in quickly with the group of girls and was always willing to try anything. To others, she had a lively, infectious smile and was gregarious, likable, caring, and overtly happy. On Friday, November 29th of 1991, Terri shared a pizza with her father before leaving their home, which was located on Limwell Road, leaving at approximately 7:30 p.m. With her, she was carrying some extra clothes because she was planning on going over to sleep over at a girlfriend's home in St. Catharines. A few hours later, which was now around 1 a.m. on November 30th, Mr. Anderson claimed that he returned home from a local bar and was surprised to find his daughter in the bathroom. She had apparently walked home with her girlfriend. But when Mr. Anderson woke later that morning, his daughter was nowhere to be found and the front door had been left ajar. But what was really odd was that Terri had also left her house keys behind, as well as $150 in cash that was meant for a shopping trip that they were going to do across the border around 11 a.m. that day. All of this combined was extremely odd because Terri was a very responsible young teen. She always made sure that she'd leave a note for her father if she was going somewhere, and she always locked the door behind her. Mr. Anderson always gave his daughter freedom, but she always let him know where she was going. At 12:30 p.m., Terri's girlfriend arrived at her home and left the clothing that Terri had had the night before on the doorstep that was meant for that sleepover. And when she didn't arrive back home by 6 p.m., her father began calling around to her friends and their parents. Later that evening, one of Terri's friends, along with their friend's mother, arrived at the Anderson home to inform Mr. Anderson that the evening his daughter disappeared, she may have been trying to experiment with drugs. But it wouldn't be until 11 p.m. that evening that Mr. Anderson would call the authorities and report his daughter missing. Police arrived around midnight, which was now December 1st, nearly 24 hours since Terri was last seen by anyone. And when Terri didn't show up to school that Monday, her father would once again call the authorities, and this time he also called the media. It wouldn't be until that point that the Niagara police would again re-interview Mr. Anderson and then begin to finally start interviewing some of Terri's friends as well as canvassing the area. By December 3rd, 25 officers, aided by police dogs, began a ground search, scouring wooded areas and shallow ravines in the Linwell Road and Ontario Street area. The search also concentrated by nearby JC Park. Officers also checked her school locker and searched Terri's home without turning up any clues. Mr. Anderson would also issue a videotaped recording of himself asking for Terri's safe return. The following day, the search expanded to 30 officers and police boats were brought in to check the shores of the nearby Martindale Pond as well as 12 Mile Creek. Residents were asked to check their backyard as an aircraft flown by a volunteer joined the search. On December 5th, approximately 400 civilian volunteers joined in another massive search of the neighborhood on the cold, bitter winter day. Authorities would also call in a Marine unit to search Martindale Pond. It would also be released by authorities around this time that Terri had most likely taken LSD for the first time the night she had disappeared. And this brought fear to the community because just a few years prior, in 1988, 14-year-old Benji Hayward had disappeared after taking LSD while at a concert at Exhibition Stadium in Toronto. He had also smoked a marijuana cigarette and drank a beer cooler drink. 5 days later, his body would be found in Lake Ontario. It was determined he had walked into the lake and drowned.
The Benji Hayward story has ended in the worst possible way. We pick up the story where it began, several nights ago. It started out as one of those happy Friday nights every 14-year-old boy wishes for. Lots of youthful exuberance to spend and friends to spend it with. 14-year-old Benji Hayward and his friends came down here to Exhibition Stadium for a waterfront concert by the legendary Pink Floyd. The night of fun ended and the nightmare began when the concert was over. Benji was missing. Hours passed. If friends had all come home, there was still no sign of Benji. Dawn came, police were called, and the search got underway. Monday, pictures of Benji were circulated, and then yesterday on City Pulse, we showed you the search by his family and friends. By now, sick with worry.
We would like everybody to go out in pairs so that no one is alone.
I'm pleased with the turnout because I don't know what to be disappointed about. I'm really happy that so many people are as concerned as we are, and we know who we're concerned about, and they're concerned about a total stranger.
This morning, a new lead in the case. A cyclist pedaling through Coronation Park here on the lakeshore found a jacket tied to a tree. He turned in the jacket to a groundskeeper. Last night, the groundskeeper, upon hearing of the search for Benji, called police and turned over the jacket. This morning, police showed us the jacket and the search intensified.
On Sunday past, a citizen riding his bicycle located the jacket that has been identified as being the one worn by the missing youth we're looking at, Benjamin Hayward.
About an hour later, City Pulse cameraman Pedro Zucat came down to Coronation Park here on the waterfront looking for an update on the search from the Metro Police Marine Unit. It was all over. They had found Benji's body.
We did, though, at 10:20 this morning, the Metro Marine Unit did find the lifeless body of a youth in Lake Ontario, about 3 feet off the seawall, which is about 6 feet above the water line, right between the park and the HMCS York. The body hasn't been officially identified as yet.
The body was brought here, and then a few hours later, Benji's father was called to make a positive ID.
Well, it's over. As everybody knows, it is Benjamin, no question. Totally accidental. He's obviously left the concert under the influence of drugs, I'm sure, and I don't make any bones about that he got there at the exhibition. Wandered around to Coronation Park, took off his jacket, folded it up neatly like Ben always does, and just walked around and went to the break wall, climbed a fence as a kid would do, walk along, and fell in and couldn't get out. Parents better take a little more time, so, as I didn't. I thought I took quite a bit of time. Maybe not watch television as much as we do and spend just a little more quality time with their kids and give the kids a little more credit. Let them talk about it, get it open, talk to your kids, listen to your kids. Maybe you'll hear something that I didn't hear, and nobody will be standing in front of cameras like this, I hope, because they tell me the drugs are back out there. We believe, we'll know officially that the kids call it acid, that I guess the right name, if it's that, is LSD. And I hear it goes for $1.50 to $3. Now, I have to pay more than that for popcorn and a show, I think. And I certainly give my kids $3 for the popcorn and $5 for the show, and I don't know what he turns it into. But I knew in my heart of hearts that Ben would have called home if he could. And I don't know, maybe I can talk more later, but right now I want to get home. That's all. And thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks.
So some people began to ask, could Terri have met a similar fate? Terri's stepsister, Nikki Harvey, worried for other reasons, saying that Terri was a very trusting young girl and that she may be hiding among a group of street kids, scared to return home due to all of the publicity of her case. Nikki saying, quote, "She's always worried about what people think of her. She's probably worried that she's upset Dad." End quote. What's strange, though, is that despite wanting to be popular and possibly experimenting with drugs in an attempt to be popular, Terri was a good girl. So why overnight would she just instantly go from being a shining student and daughter to running away? That just didn't make sense. She had the freedom to go out if she wanted to. Her dad allowed her that freedom. She just, always let him know where she was going. So why would that just change instantly? Things were adding up. Although Terri hadn't seen her mother in 5 years, from all accounts from her friends and her family, Terri didn't have any issues at home or any problems that had been bothering her. There was no reason that she would have just ran away. But months later, in May of 1992, Terri's partially clothed body would be found floating face down in the Port Dalhousie harbor, not far from her home. Authorities at the time theorized that LSD may have led her to thinking she could swim in the water in the middle of winter, or she may have fell in, similar to Benji Hayward's fate. Only a couple months later, in April of 1992, 15-year-old Kristen French would vanish just blocks from where Terri Anderson had. Kristen was on the rowing team at Holy Cross Separate School, located beside Terri's school. She also competed as a skater at local events. Kristen had a lot of friends, her social life being very full. She was looking forward to a large family gathering later that fall where her cousin was getting married. Her mother saying, quote, "Kristen was going to be a bridesmaid and had already been fitted for the gown she was going to be wearing." End quote. It would be around 8:15 a.m. on April 16th of 1992 that Kristen's mother would drop her off at school before heading to work. This would be the last time that she would see her daughter, who was clad in her school uniform, wearing a white turtleneck sweater, a green and gray plaid skirt, green stockings, a green pullover v-neck embossed with the Holy Cross monogram, maroon-colored loafers, a black leather jacket, and a toted Kettle Creek duffel bag. She also had a diamond stud earring in her ear that day, and wore a gold chain which dangled a religious medal and a charm, engraved with the words, "Yesterday, today, and forever," which had been a gift from her boyfriend, Elton Wade. A schoolmate named Tara Wilson recalled seeing a fellow classmate named Mark Lobsinger spotting Kristen walking east on Linwell Road around 2:55 p.m. that day. But when she didn't come home later that day, her parents reported her missing. Her shoe would later be found in the parking lot of the Grace Lutheran Church, witnesses reporting to have seen Kristen being abducted from that very parking lot around 3 p.m. that day. Witness Barbara Packham recalled driving that day to pick up her daughter at a manicurist's, and as she was driving and approaching Grace Lutheran Church, she witnessed someone bent over and leaning into a car, which had the passenger door opened. And this person appeared to be in some sort of struggle. But since there were so many people in and around that area wearing school uniforms, she just assumed it was most likely some teens messing about. Unfortunately, weeks later, on April 30th, Kristen's body would be discovered in a ditch along No. 1 Side Road in Burlington, about 45 minutes from St. Catharines, where she was last seen alive. Her naked body was found to be washed and her hair was cut off, her cause of death being strangulation. By May, authorities launched a massive probe asking anyone who drove a cream-colored Camaro in the Burlington to St. Catharines region to submit to having it voluntarily searched. This was the vehicle that the witness claimed to have seen the person struggling at. After this, 1,500 calls would be placed to the Burlington police station, sometimes up to 120 calls an hour by concerned citizens or others offering information. It wouldn't be until February 17th of 1993 that an arrest would be made that would shock the country. And Kristen would be announced to be a victim of who we now know as serial assayer and murderer Paul Bernardo and his wife Karla Homolka. It would be revealed that as Kristen was walking home that April day, she was approached by Karla and Paul at the entrance of the Grace Lutheran Church. Karla had gotten out of the car carrying a map, pretending to need help with directions. Kristen, being a friendly social young teen, went right up to Karla to help her, trusting that this pretty 20-year-old woman was actually looking for help. But as Kristen was giving Karla advice, Paul would sneak up behind her and force her into the vehicle at knife point. And keep in mind, this is all happening in broad daylight, how brazen Paul and Karla were. Medical examiners along with investigators would determine that Kristen had been held captive for 3 days. And during that time, Paul and Karla subjected her to horrific things. Unthinkably horrific. If you have never watched a documentary about the Barbie and Ken killers, I definitely recommend doing so. But keep in mind, the details I'm going to provide you, although these are even just brief considering how much information is out there on these two. It's so scary just to think what these two were capable of, and to think if they hadn't been caught when they were, how many more victims would be out there. And then on top of that, just to think that Karla is walking our streets to this day in Canada. She is released. She is free. It is terrifying to think that she was part of all of this, and our justice system just completely failed. For 3 days, the couple would videotape themselves torturing Kristen, subjecting her to sexual humiliation and degrading her, all while forcing her to drink large amounts of alcohol. Kristen would be remembered for declining cooperation with her abductors in the latter period of her abduction, saying things such as, quote, "Some things are worth dying for," end quote, and telling Paul, quote, "I don't know how your wife can stand being around you," end quote. And in a shocking twist, Paul would go on to admit to killing 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy. He claims that on the night that she was locked out of her home, he had been on Keller Court, where her home was located, attempting to steal license plates. Noticing the young girl alone, he claims he told her he was breaking into the house next door and then offered her a cigarette, which he said was in the back of his car, in an attempt to lure her to it. When they were close enough, he said he then wrapped his sweatshirt quickly around her head, forcing her into the vehicle. He then took her to the home that he shared with Karla. Karla's version of events of how Paul kidnapped Leslie is similar, but she claimed that Paul pulled a knife on Leslie in an attempt to gain her compliance, which is something that he did before with Kristen. So it's not very surprising if he did do that. But we have to keep in mind that Karla allegedly wasn't present for the kidnapping of Leslie. But for the next 24 hours, both Paul and Karla would abuse Leslie. And they would end up giving her a teddy bear to hold between the assaults as some form of comfort. Karla was a VEC tech at the time, and she was able to access sedative drugs, which she used to subdue Leslie. It's also noted Leslie was given sleeping pills and alcohol, and all of this was also captured on Paul and Karla's home movies. The plan, allegedly, with Leslie was that they were going to leave her alive and dump her somewhere in Burlington because she had been blindfolded for most of the attack, so she wouldn't be able to identify Paul and Karla. But Paul claims that while he was getting the car ready for the trip, Karla killed Leslie. And she allegedly did this by pushing Leslie's face into a pillow and kneeling on her back, holding her down until she suffocated. There were also claims of Leslie dying from being heavily drugged. But either way, Leslie was murdered, and after this, her body was kept in the basement of the home while Carla and Paul celebrated Father's Day and Carla's family attended it. Afterwards, they used Paul's grandfather's circular saw to dismember Leslie's body, and that's when they encased it in that concrete. But Carla claimed that she didn't kill Leslie before helping Paul dismember her. However, pathologists would end up finding 2 small bruises on Leslie's back that were consistent with the size and the position that Carla's knees would have been in. Keep in mind, this woman is walking free. I'm pretty sure she took a plea deal, even though she essayed and murdered multiple young girls, including her own sister. Just keep that in mind. It's insane. Despite the pathologist's finding, Carla would argue that on June 15th, Paul strangled Leslie with an electrical cord twice. The first attempt left her unconscious only for a few minutes, so that's why he did it again. Now, in a shocking twist, Terri's case was also thought to possibly be connected to Paul and Carla. And this was after Carla allegedly told police that Paul had said to her that it had been a waste of time that he hadn't had sex with her, meaning Terri. Carla also claimed that Paul was aware of Terri before her disappearance, saying that Paul had allegedly told her that he had seen Terri sitting on the side of the road and had smiled at her, and had said that when the two had locked eyes, he had felt a karma between them. Not only that, but Paul lived less than 2 kilometers from Terri's home, and Terri would have passed by a donut shop that Paul often stalked women from. On top of that, on the night Terri disappeared, Paul was said to be out looking for another victim. Oddly though, Carla said that she doesn't believe that Paul actually killed Terri because despite going out to look for a victim that night, he didn't come home bragging about it, which he usually would have. But we also have to remember that Terri's body was found partially clothed. The coroner, however, also didn't find any signs of vaginal penetration. There was said to be no trauma to her body, but there was also no definitive cause of death. Which then makes me ask, if there was no definitive cause of death, were they unable to determine drowning then? That's normally something that they're able to determine. But on top of all of that strange coincidence, when authorities searched Paul's home, they also found a half-page newspaper clipping detailing how investigators were satisfied Terri had simply drowned. Why would Paul have that in his home? It's giving serial killer trophy or a serial killer trying to keep up to see if he's going to get caught. But despite all of these strange inconsistencies and things that were popping up, authorities refused to reopen Terri's case and just simply said she accidentally drowned after taking LSD. But not everyone agreed with authorities on this ruling. Some investigators, along with Terri's stepmother, believe that the case had been poorly handled from the beginning and was just another example of the sloppy police work happening at that time and the soured relations between police forces that were the hallmark of the Bernardo and Homolka case. Again, just another example of just how bad some of these police forces were at the time when it came to serial killers. Because at the time, Paul Bernardo also had victims in the Toronto Scarborough area. And as we know, the Toronto Police Force also just a decade or so later also messed up on yet another serial killer case. It's just ridiculous how the authorities in this region has handled serial killers. It really is. So would it be surprising if they messed up on Terri's case as well? I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be. So when it comes to Terri's case, there are just so many unanswered questions, such as, why was Terri only found wearing her shirt, bra, and panties, but not her skin-tight jeans? How would only her jeans come off in the water? Usually, jeans stick to the skin when they get wet. Yet, a pair of panties stayed on? It's strange. But also, what lured her out of the home that late? Could it have just been that she was, influenced by the LSD to leave the home? And then, it was a matter of circumstances. Paul seen her, he was out looking, did something to her, or did she simply just wander into the lake? Another unsolved case at the time with similarities is that of 17-year-old Cindy Halliday. Cindy was born on December 6th of 1974 to her mother Jackie and was a loving young woman who had a passion for hockey, being the youngest child in a family of 3 girls and 1 boy. At the age of 6, Cindy joined the York Canadian Girls Hockey Organization of Toronto and continued to play on boys' teams after her parents separated, and her mother moved to Waverley, Ontario in 1985. Waverley being located at an intersection of Highway 93, Simcoe Road 27, and Simcoe Road 23, and is the crossroads of 4 townships, with a population of only around 50 people in current times. Cindy's childhood friend, Anne-Marie Young, would say, quote, "We go to the beach, go biking, go to parties, or just sit and chat and listen to music. Cindy was a really good person. She was a good person and was very kind-hearted. She would give you the shirt off her back." End quote. Cindy had dreams of becoming a social worker one day and had strong connections with her friends and family. Her mother Jackie saying, quote, "She loved to push her sister's buttons. She could be stubborn. She just had that daredevil mentality, but she was very caring." End quote. Around 5:30 p.m. on April 20th of 1992, Cindy left Barrie, Ontario after visiting a friend at a halfway house. Her plan was to hitchhike the 35 kilometers home to Waverly along Highway 27. She would last be seen getting into a light color Chrysler LeBron or Dodge Diplomat in front of the Strip Plaza on Highway 27 at Finley Mill Road in Midhurst. This happened between approximately 5:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. However, Cindy would never make it home to Waverly. And the next day, her mother Jackie would report her missing. And at first, her disappearance wasn't taken seriously, and she was looked at as a teenage runaway with a draw to the fast pace of the city. She wasn't an honor student or a pretty rich girl from Toronto, but that didn't mean she didn't deserve to be found and justice didn't need to be served. Yes, it would turn out that she had dropped out of high school and she had often hitchhiked, but she was still a minor. She was only 17 years old. And again, I will continue to say, everyone deserves to be found. Everyone deserves justice. Authorities should have been all over her case, just like in Kristen's case, just like in Leslie's case. But eventually, investigators would begin to probe Cindy's case, and a series of clues would begin to pop up over the next 2 months. And this is when police would conclude that they believed she had been killed. And this theory would come to fruition when on Sunday, May 3rd of 1992, nearly 2 weeks after Cindy's disappearance, a man collecting bottles would find her wallet on a grassy mound surrounded by swamp, just a few feet from a dirt road in a wooded area off the old Second Line, or Concession Road 2, in Vesper Township, near Horseshoe Valley Road. This would launch a massive search by OPP using a tracking dog, but it failed to find anything. Nearly 2 weeks after that, on May 16th, a mushroom picker would find a red, white, and blue jacket that Cindy had last been seen wearing at the time of her disappearance when she left home. This would be discovered folded neatly between 2 trees, not much farther from a crude marker police had placed at the side of the road to distinguish the search area. Police at the time believed that that jacket was placed there after they searched. And due to it being placed in plain view of the road, they also believed that it was placed there to taunt investigators. Because if it had been there during the initial search, it would have been found. Finally, on Tuesday, June 16th, a man walking his dog would discover a skull in a reforestation area on the north side of Horseshoe Valley Road, about 2 kilometers northwest of where her jacket had been found. The skull was said to be laying in a bed of pine needles under the forest canopy, bugs crawling across its crown. About 20 feet away, a lower jaw was found. These bones would later be determined to be Cindy's. A few weeks later, some more clothing items, a watch, ring, and shoes were also found nearby where her jacket had been found. Investigators also suggested at the time that something that should have been there wasn't, but didn't say what it was. But this led authorities to believe that her killer had kept an item as a trophy. They also noted that taunting investigators was something serial killers did. The following October, authorities would say that forensic testing, along with holes that were found in the clothing items found, determined that Cindy had been stabbed to death. It was unclear if she had also been assayed due to her body not being intact anymore and animals had actually scattered body parts throughout the forest. And with all of these cases, as it seems, authorities would look into the idea that Paul and Carla were connected to Cindy's murder. She disappeared just 4 days after Kristen French did, and disappeared only 50 kilometers from where Leah was murdered. But not only that, but she was also last seen getting into a light-colored vehicle, just like Kristen had been. But for one reason or another, authorities don't seem to believe that Cindy was killed by Paul and Carla. And then they also seem to believe that there was no indication that she was killed by a serial killer, but I don't know. I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if that was just miswritten in a newspaper, but let me know down below if you know more. I'm not sure if Paul and Carla were ruled out because they have some kind of other alibi or what the reasoning may be. But back in 1993, authorities believed that her killer may be a man in his 20s to 30s who likely knew the area. Her mother Jackie would second this theory that her killer must have known the area, saying that if you were just an occasional person driving up in that area, you wouldn't know those back roads. But despite a $50,000 reward being offered by the OPP in 2006, her case still remains unsolved. All of this is to say, we have multiple young girls who were found murdered or disappeared in the early 90s in southern Ontario. Some cases solved, other cases still remaining unsolved. All of this happened in the same time span, and it's extremely odd. Some were ruled to have been perpetrated by Carl and Paul. Others, again, we don't know. Could they still be connected? I have questions. There were also other cases at the time that were unsolved that have now been solved that were mentioned, such as the disappearance and murder of 11-year-old Allison Parrott, which happened in Toronto in 1986. Allison is a case that I've covered before. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a horrific case. 11-year-old Allison was also active in sports, and she was lured from her home by a man calling her home, where she answered the phone and told her that he was going to be taking photos for her sports team and for her to go downtown Toronto to go be part of these photos. But instead, she was abducted and murdered. Now, at the time when all these girls were disappearing, her case wasn't solved. It would later be solved, and it was someone completely unrelated. But it makes me wonder, what were Paul and Carla's alibis during these other girls' murders? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Paul was known to stab or bludgeon his victims. It seems he was into strangulation or, drugging them. Things like that would happen. But it makes me wonder, could he have been experimenting? Or if they weren't connected, could both Cindy and Leah's killer be the same person? Because Cindy was abducted and Leah was murdered, only around 50 kilometers away from each other in that same kind of area. It was quite far from St. Catharines in Toronto. So I could see Paul being involved with those murders, but maybe not Cindy and Leah's. But then again, Paul did travel in some instances to dump body parts. So is it possible he could have been traveling up there to experiment? Or could this be a completely different killer who focused on the Barrie area? And could it have been the same serial killer who was experimenting on different methods? In one, there was bludgeoning that happened, and the other, stabbing. Such as one suspect named Brian Elson, who was brought up in a documentary released on Leah's case last year. He was on the police's radar because just 4 months after Leah's murder, Brian attacked 17-year-old Sandra Bannister at a party, stabbing her through the heart. His grandmother lived down the street from the Sousas during the murder of Leah. He was questioned and interviewed multiple times about the crime, but it led to nowhere due to an alibi. When it comes to Leah's case in 2008, the OPP erected a series of billboards along Highway 11 from Barrie to Cumberland Beach as part of a campaign aided to draw new tips. This helped bring Leah's story back to the forefront and led to a tip regarding the murder weapon. This led police to scour the ditch along Highway 11 across from Cumberland Beach. 6 OPP officers would be captured walking shoulder to shoulder in grid fashion along a 140-meter wide swath of scrub, beating the bush with rakes and pitchforks as they searched for a heavy blunt object. In 2015, on the 25th anniversary of her murder, a press conference would be held at the OPP headquarters in Aurelia. And as I'm posting this video, we are falling on yet again another anniversary. To this day, in Leah's case, the murder weapon, the attackers, their clothing, nothing has been found in relation to her case. And as I just mentioned, we have all of these other cases, some that are also unsolved, or some who may need to be opened again because there may be other connections that were never made. But regarding Leah's case, over 1,500 interviews have been conducted, and thousands of tips have said to be thoroughly investigated. Some investigators even traveled coast to coast following tips. Boxes are said to be stacked floor to ceiling for her case. Yet still, Leah's killer is walking free among us. Cindy's killer is still walking free among us. Laura would say, quote, "I'm really upset. 25 years is a lifetime. She was robbed of her life, her dreams. I feel utterly helpless and I cannot stand it. I can't rest until I see them arrested and convicted." End quote. If you have any information that can lead to any of these cases being solved, please contact the authorities. I'll have the information for the cases down below. And if you have any other information or interesting facts that I didn't include here today, comment them down below and I'll be chatting with you all in the comment section. My heart goes out to these families. I truly hope justice will come soon. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.